In church growing up, we sang, "On Christ the solid rock I stand, all other ground is sinking sand." In other words, when your world is shaking, there is one single certainty: God. But over the last few decades, the one sure thing in poll after poll has actually been that young people are leaving the church, disenchanted many times with bureaucracy or hypocrisy. They became what's called the nuns. No church, sometimes no belief at all. That is changing, especially among young men. Gen Z men now outnumber female counterparts in the pews. Eastern Orthodox churches in the U.S. are seeing this surge of young male converts. The French Catholic Church just celebrated its largest intake of full new members on Easter 2025 ever. And this is happening throughout the West. What does it all mean? And how can churches help build that firm, healthy foundation for young men who are searching and showing up at their doors? Griffin Gooch has this excellent Substack. I'm a subscriber. It's called Reality Theology. He's working on his doctorate of theology at the University of Aberdeen, and he has a unique view as a young scholar, lecturer, and believer. Griffin Gooch, welcome to All Boy.
That's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Just to get us started here, the lens you're looking through, and again, you're going to objectively look through this as a scholar as well, but your religious, spiritual outlook, what is it?
So kind of a hodgepodge of different things, but technically the broadest way that I would describe it is Pentecostal, or just evangelical, if we want to even take it broader than that. So just very influenced by like the modern evangelical Pentecostal tradition. But I mean, beyond that, and I think we're probably going to get into some of this later on in the conversation, there's a huge interest in just historical theology right now, especially happening among my generation. So even though it's like, we're very fascinated, most of my friends and I are very fascinated in Pentecostalism, we also are extremely interested in just the entire historic faith, like taking every different stream of what's been going on in Christianity, studying it, learning about it, implementing some of it even, and then kind of seeing what rises to the top, or whatever you want to call it.
You said my generation, you were born in 97, right? Is that Gen Z?
Technically, I think I'm the eldest of the Gen Z. But yeah, when I tell people that I'm 27, most people think that I'm a millennial. But it's like, no, technically still Gen Z. Just
you squeaked in. Okay, and I do have to ask, Pentecostal. My entire family are Assemblies of God preachers.
Oh wow!
The women and men are carrying on that tradition. Clearly, I am not, but I love them, and I'm always texting them about the Bible. Which strain of Pentecostalism?
It's very close to Assemblies of God, actually. That's actually the college that I professor at right now. They're Assemblies of God. So I'm very, very close to that. But technically just like a non-denominational offshoot of that is what I would say is most blatantly. But yeah, pretty. Okay. One of the things about just general evangelicalism is it's very like spread out and segregated in a sense. There's not as many strict rules or guidelines, and so it can get kind of a little relative here and there. Like there's that, I can't remember who said it, but it's there's this quote where it's like, in Protestantism, every person is their own pope, which is kind of silly, but it's accurate. You know, a lot of it is all over the place. But yeah.
And now I'm Catholic, so you brought this full circle. Let's talk about greater trends that we're seeing. You're really steeped in this world and in the conversation. I love your Substack. I read it every time you post something. Have you noticed a trend, especially among young men, moving back toward God?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think if you had asked this question maybe 5 or 6 years ago, I wouldn't have said it as much. But nowadays, we're starting to see it in a way that's historically unprecedented. Like, again, so if we're taking just the college that I'm working at right now, Assemblies of God College, in our oncoming class of freshmen, it is 75% men and 25% girls, which is an absolute historical anomaly for almost any Christian organization throughout history. Like if you take a church history course, you read through some church history textbooks, you'll find, like, without very many exceptions whatsoever, is that the majority of most Christian communities are made up of women. And especially in times in history where Christianity starts to fizzle out or, kind of like have a dip, the women actually step in and help, recreate it, give like new life to it. But yeah, so right now it's so strange. And I've been talking about this with a lot of my friends as well, but we're trying to kind of figure out exactly what the appeal is right now for young men. But that's what
Hmm.
I've been hearing from most of my friends when we're talking about college ministries, when we're talking about, who's showing up to their youth group. It's so many young men, and for whatever reason, just less young women than usual. And
That is so crazy. In 2002, I had my freshman year at North Central University, the alma mater of Jim and Tammy Faye Baker. And I have to say, and then I left because it was not for me. But it was, I'd say about 50-50. And there was a big deal even then, this ring before spring, at least in this strain of Christianity, where you're not having sex before marriage, theoretically, and you want to live in the university housing where husbands and wives can live. You want men and women 75-25. That is crazy.
oh, I know, it's insane. Yeah.
Wow. Okay. So that's happening. I was not expecting that because a lot of the numbers I've read in evangelicalism and, of course, in mainline Protestantism, the numbers are still in recession. I did not expect you to say that in something that is a more conservative line of being charismatic or Pentecostal. Wow.
Yeah, and I mean, I don't have the full-on statistics for all broad Protestant evangelical, in the entire nation off the top of my
Sure.
head, but just from my anecdotal experience here in the Midwest, that's what we've been seeing.
Okay, well, let's talk about the global phenomenon because I pulled these numbers from the Catholic Review. The French Catholic Church saw a record number of catechumens Easter 2025 enter the church, up 45% in 1 year. Last year was also a record. 18 to 25-year-olds, that's 42%. So it seems to be pretty diverse.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That's insane.
This Catholicism, yeah, and this is a bit of my hobby horse,
Yeah.
but it used to be thought of as old and stodgy. Growing up, my grandpa, my pastor, would talk about, we don't need to say the creeds here, and that's old and dusty and whatever. And he didn't have anything against it. He just thought, where was the life? Well, we're seeing a lot of life among young people. Any idea as to why young people are hewing toward more traditional, forms of Christianity?
Yeah, so. I have two main suspicions about why this is, and the first one I would say is just the aspect of rituals, just in daily
Hmm.
life. Well, actually, there's this philosopher named Byung-Chul Han who's amazing. He's a Catholic philosopher. If you're ever interested, he has these amazing, just short books, like 60 pages a pop. They're great. But he has this book called The Disappearance of Rituals, and he kind of talks about what happens to a society and what happens to a culture when their rituals kind of disappear and recede
Huh.
from daily life, and it gives people like a lack of place and a lack of temporality. It feels like they're dislodged from time, dislodged from any rhythm to their lives. Because, if we're going off of like a Christian theological view, God ordered our time. He ordered our week to essentially revolve around this 7-day schedule. And then even beyond that, there's festivals, there's feasts, there's all of these things in like the Israelite law that was, putting people in specific places and in specific times to do specific rituals in order to bring about everything in a sort of cohesion or whatever you want to
Hmm.
call it. And obviously, like as Christians, we don't need to take all of those rituals or laws or everything seriously necessarily, but the principle behind those laws, which is the fact that rituals are essentially good for humans to stay in ritual, to have a location in time, to have a location in place, and to not be super caught up in just kind of waking up and like living each day as you might as well, like kind of
Right.
lazily, kind of there was the philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche. He has this idea of like the last man, who's this very just lazy person who doesn't have much ambition in their lives. They kind of just want to go through the motions, experience pleasures, and then just kind of live off to the side or whatever, without any structure, without any commitments, or without anything along those lines. But the thing is about like if you actually live as the last man, you end up pretty depressed. Like you don't
Hmm.
have a lot of connections. If you even want to talk about like Emil Durkheim and his theory of society, where it's like the people in society who have the most joy and the most meaning and the most connection are those who have more commitments. They are committed to more rituals. They are committed to other people. They're committed to service. They have reasons to get out of bed in the morning other than just following their own pleasure, which, despite what we might want to say, actually does give us a lot to work off of. And so
Obligation can be very good.
So good. Yes.
Yeah,
And especially for men specifically right now. Um, Sorry, I'm kind of going on a tangent here,
I
but
love it.
there was this psychologist named David Gilmour. I think he talked about this sometime in the past decade, but he was talking about how historically the roles of men it's threefold. It's impregnator, protector, and provider. But in the
Mhm.
past 100 years, those three roles have kind of become obscured for men. Obviously, they can still fulfill those roles, but each and every year for the past century or so, they've been told less and less that they are needed to fulfill those roles. But
Mm.
without actually having those roles, men have less meaning or feelings of belonging in a culture, in a group, in their community, and everything like that. Because those things, whether or not they want to admit it or discuss it, they actually do provide a deep sense of meaning that actually gives them a sense of place, a sense of love, a sense of belonging. And yeah,
Mhm.
absolutely.
Wow. You said there were two parts.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. So, anyways, having a sense of a ritual, a sense of a calendar, a sense of just on this day of the week at this time of the year, this is what we are celebrating, what we are
A
talking about.
liturgical calendar.
A liturgical calendar, things along
Okay.
those lines, those give such a deep sense of ritual to people. And so, if you're a young man who is living like the last man or whatever, not having a ton going for them, joining a Catholic church or an Eastern Orthodox church where there is that liturgical calendar, that offers you so much. Like
Mm.
you have like you can basically now schedule every part of your day around something that is beyond yourself, a commitment to
Mm.
fulfill acts that transcend your own basic needs. You are now a part of something that is bigger than yourself at every moment of every day, and it gives a rhythm to your life. And then
Mm.
second, the other thing is there's no celebrityism in the Catholic Church or the Eastern Orthodox Church, as far as I can tell. And that's a huge thing in Protestantism, where it's like you build your entire church, you build your entire congregation around a phenomenal worship leader who's an amazing singer, probably writes some good songs that might end up on the radio or something like that. And then you also center it around a pastor who is an amazingly gifted speaker. And so if you center everything about a church service around essentially talent or performance, it
Mm.
becomes so similar to all the other facets of culture that we're being offered right now. Because I mean, if you think about what you do in your free time. You are spending time on social media, and what pops to the top of your social media, it's the things that are most popular, the people who are performing the best, the people who are making the best content. You go onto your streaming services, the same thing happens. It's the best content that rises to the top, and so it becomes another pattern of performance. And so if churches are operating by that same sort of capitalistic consumeristic model, they're
Mhm.
there arises this danger that it will become similar to that, where people will see it as another form of consumerism. And so when we have churches along these lines putting their people forward as celebrities or personalities or people who
Mhm.
perform very well, it kind of mitigates the psychological or even just spiritual effects of the church, and it becomes more something that you would just go to just to enjoy rather than something that is
Mhm.
deeply, deeply meaningful in your spirit and for its own sake. But in Catholic and Eastern Orthodox contexts, you don't really have that. Like,
We just have the Pope. And I think there's something to what you're saying, which is that, growing up in the 80s and 90s in my church, we had a great choir downtown Kansas City. We had Goldie, a very elderly lady who was the nicest who could ever be, putting on the projection slides, and we'd all sing. Now, a lot of church services are the pastor has the ripped jeans, and you get your coffee, and there's the lights and the
yeah.
fog machine, and you're going, I guess this is good. I'm not really sure. But then you see the parts of Christianity, including those that might be more really strict in the Protestant realm, which were not so seeker sensitive, that kind of said, we're going to do this the way we do it. And there is a draw to that now. I did ask Claude to give me the numbers. I wanted to run this through him. I love Claude. Buddhism, Hinduism, Islam, Judaism, whatever, to tell me the numbers in those, give me the similar trends. And they said, this is primarily centered in Christianity. Any hunch as to why? I mean, maybe they didn't lose people in the beginning and in the way that we lost people. I don't know.
That's a great question. I actually have no idea.
Hmm.
I would assume it's I mean, Christianity, I think it's just objectively the best story. And so, I mean, whereas these other religions do have good stories and do have good narratives behind them, I think Christianity does supersede them, just narratively wise. Sorry if that wasn't even
Mm.
a word, but narrative wise, Christianity, if we're going to, affirm biblical orthodoxy, it's like this is the best story that's ever been made. Most of our movies, our TV shows, or even our songs are related to its structure in some sense. And so, whereas these other religions might have, I mean, if you want to just take Buddhism, Stoicism, or something like that, for example, they do have some decently good truth behind it, where it's like, don't be too attached to your possessions, don't, be too obsessed with your emotions and getting everything that you want all the time. Where it's
Yeah.
those are great lessons, and they can actually help people in a certain way. But beyond just that, Christianity has the story, it has the experience, it has the entire history, and pretty convincing historical evidence to argue for its truth. And the resurrection does have pretty good historical reliability, if we even want to talk about it like that. And so I think it does have a lot of convincing aspects to it that do supersede some of these other sects.
And I mean, we do have shared roots with Judaism, which I was texting my cousin and grandpa. He's 93 years old, but very engaged. And I told him, we got to get rid of Chronicles. I'm sorry, but Chronicles does not need to be there after Kings. So anyway, that's my one gripe. Yeah, I'll take that up with you another time. But let's talk about Eastern Orthodoxy, because Eastern Orthodoxy, it is so mysterious to most people from the outside. Yet, the Orthodox Studies Institute here in the United States saw a 62% spike in conversions in 2022. Single men were the biggest group to convert. Men far outnumber women. And in previous years, it kind of tracked, and then suddenly men, and it seems to be continuing. Any idea why?
Wow, I mean, that's crazy. I actually didn't know that statistic at all.
Mm-hmm.
Eastern Orthodoxy does have, I mean, to put it crudely, it does have a certain amount of sexiness right now, just among Christians in
The
general.
mysticism, or what is it?
Yeah, well, the mysticism definitely has a lot of like appeal in that regard as well. But there is just something about Eastern Orthodox theology that a lot of people are finding very just compelling in a sense. So if we want to take broad sweeps of what our culture has been through, like in the past, I don't know, 200 years or so, we went
Yeah.
from modernism to postmodernism, and now we're starting to get into something called metamodernism, which we don't have to talk about in full detail right now. But if you take postmodernism, which is essentially just this idea that we can't trust anything, that we should look at our assumptions as if they are inherently flawed, that there is no meta narrative to anything. And so that creates this kind of skepticism, or like critical theory, not CRT, but just a critical theory about how I'm just going to be very suspicious of anyone that says that they have all of the answers worked out, or
Mm-hmm.
anything like that. So anyone who says that they know the absolute truth, and if you just follow them, they will get you there beyond a shadow of a doubt, and they are not flawed whatsoever in what they are saying. So when you have postmodernism bleeding into essentially all of our educational systems, our TV shows, our media, and everything like that, we come to a place where we're skeptical of people who say that they have all the answers. And so Protestants, Reformed tradition has Calvinist traditions have a lot of I wouldn't say arrogance or anything like that, because I do like love and respect these traditions like immensely and everything like that. But I would say that there is kind of this aspect of those traditions that really believes that they have every single answer to every single theological question, and part of their faith and their righteousness is intertwined with them being able to answer every question to a T beyond a shadow.
Systematic theology, right?
Yes, very similar to that, right? And so that's to somebody who's been raised in postmodernism, like most of Gen Z, most of millennials, everything like that. So when we hear something like that, we're like, that is a total turnoff. We don't want anything to do like that. We don't want anything to do with that. But then if you go to the Eastern Orthodox tradition, which again, this is a very bad summary. It's just but I'm just giving a very quick summary, but it's a bad
Please.
summary. A lot of their theology is very interested in this idea of mystery, where when you get to these questions about God's immutability or impassibility, rather than insisting on exactly one claim that is the exact truth, and anyone who does not subscribe to that exact belief without having any nuance or doubt about other beliefs. So Eastern Orthodox theology, rather than insisting on that, they get lost in the sense of mystery, where they see a question like that. So, I mean, they see something like immutability or God's impassibility, which is just this idea that God never changes and he never changes his mind. He doesn't get too emotionally passionate about things. Again, bad summaries that I'm giving right now, but this is just broad strokes. So when they see something like that, but then also see that God is moved by prayer by people constantly throughout the biblical narrative, this impassible, immutable God who seems to change his mind and relents and
Yeah.
spar back and forth almost between people who are praying to him. Eastern Orthodox people would just tend to go with an explanation that would say, we don't know. Let's just get lost in this mystery. But rather than letting that mystery frustrate them, they would turn it into worship. They'd say, we're not necessarily sure. And let's find some beauty in that. And again, if Eastern Orthodox people are listening to that, I'm so sorry for summarizing it poorly. There's so much more nuance there. I'm sorry.
I appreciate it. And let me read a few more demographic numbers from that same study. 62% of new members were under 40 years old, which again would blow the mind of a lot of people a few years ago. 73% do not have minor children. So they're not just coming so their kids can go to Sunday school. 65% come from Protestant backgrounds. They asked about motivation. A full 60% just said theology. You're a theologian. How does that strike you? Right?
No, I mean, there is a compelling aspect to it, and I think it's just for all these reasons of, hey, they're not pretending to have everything worked out to an absolute T. They've put in their theology a belief that God is so much higher than them that they will never be able to comprehend everything exactly as it is or as it should be or as it is to an absolute T. And so they should get, rather than letting that vagueness or mystery frustrate them, they should just turn it into something to find joy in.
Or scare them. Because honestly, growing up, I thought, let me remember every single sin before I go to bed. Because if I forget one and the rapture happens, 7 years of tribulation, I got a mark in the back of my hand or forehead, and maybe I'll get my head chopped off if I don't do it. A lot of us grew up very scared if you didn't get every single thing right. And just to have these options that say, it's about your heart. Yes, your actions matter too, but it's about your heart. There is a little freedom in that, it seems like.
Oh, absolutely.
So once churches get these men into the pews, how do they help nurture them? How do they help keep them?
Well, that's a good question too. I can't remember his name right now, but there was this one Holocaust survivor who he went on to reform education all throughout Europe. And one of his big things for his philosophy of education, which was very successful. I mean, the schools that he started had revolutionized education for until now. I mean, people are still reeling with some of the innovations that he was making. And he had this line where he was like, if you want somebody to do something, you can tell them what to do. That probably won't be too effective. You can yell at them. That also probably won't be effective. Or you can tell them that they are needed. And this will work beyond the shadow of a doubt. If you just tell people that they are needed.
That's really cool.
And so one of the things that I think young men got a lot of within the past decade that maybe young women did not get as much of, because young women were attending in such large droves as opposed to young men who were receding in large droves. But now those statistics have reversed, is that young men were being told that they are very much needed in this church. They're very much needed to fulfill God's call in their lives. They were very much needed in the sense to make a difference in the world. They were not meant to just wallow. They were not meant to just kind of go about their lives, just earning money or achievement or success or anything like that. They were meant for something greater than that. And so when a young man shows up to the pews, I think they were much more likely to get a message that not only are they wanted there, but they are also needed. And I mean, I can speak even just as a young man who I came to become a Christian almost 10 years ago now. And so I remember when I became a Christian, that was one of the things that blew me away, is that people were like, oh, you're a Christian, you're a man. How about lead this small group? Here's this responsibility. Here's this dignity that we're going to offer you. And I wasn't getting that dignity from any other place in the world. I wasn't going to my classes and getting assigned like leadership roles. I wasn't, winning like a bunch of competitions and getting respect that way. And so when I showed up to church and somebody looked at me and was like, you can actually do these things. Here's the responsibility. I believe in you. I mean, that was so inspiring. And I'm still reeling from how inspiring that was. And
Did you grow up in church?
I did. It was a lot of Christmas and Easter services from what I remember, but I was a pretty hard atheist by the time that I was 13. And then
Nietzsche.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah.
Very atheistic. And then when I was 18, I converted to Christianity.
Okay. Now, you talked about small groups. I'd like to get your take on men's ministry. In my church, Grandma, she ran WMs, as we called it, and there was a men's ministry. I have to tell you, I hated it. If there was a Promise Keepers breakfast, no, please don't make me go. I hate this. I didn't want to be around all of them. But yeah, it's really, really powerful for a lot of men. What makes a good men's ministry?
Oh man. Okay. So I can absolutely relate to that. I remember in my college years specifically, there would be these men's ministry retreats that my very close friends and I, we would not go to because we really didn't enjoy them, because it would be things along the lines of, go into this woods and just camp there with no tent or anything for like a weekend. And then there was the other aspect of it where it's like, okay, we're not going to go into a woods this time, but we're going to get together and we're only going to be talking about porn for about 48 hours of just this retreat, just talking about porn. And my friends and I were like, that's not really necessarily our struggle. I mean, we understand lust, but that's not our thing. And so it wasn't something that we would necessarily enjoy. But since then, I've really realized that there is so much importance in just hanging out with men, having these just small groups of other guys that you can actually trust and talk to, and not just have it to be an accountability group. There's this great writer on Substack, maybe you follow him, his name is Samuel James with the Digital Liturgies Substack, but he had this great article where it was just talking about men need more than accountability groups. They need actual friendship, they need community, they need to communicate with each other over and beyond just their sin struggles or anything like that. They need to laugh, they need to enjoy hanging out together. And so, I mean, specifically since college, after, getting married and, not having male roommates, I was like, oh, I actually have to be intentional about having male friendships. And so, just building little habits or rhythms into your daily or weekly schedule where you can actually communicate with guys, hang out, find some activity that you guys actually enjoy doing together, and then sticking to that has been so life-giving and so helpful.
I love that idea of actual connection, because a lot of people, that's why they enter church, is that they feel they're searching, and they're searching for God. They're searching for connection. Maybe they want to create a family. Who else do you recommend if someone's new to religion or spirituality? You're on Substack. Who else do you recommend reading or listening to? Because someone will fill that void, and you want it to be someone good. Yes.
Oh, no, absolutely. So are you talking about specifically on Substack?
No, not necessarily.
Okay. Well, on Substack, if we're going to talk in that direction, I think Samuel James, Ian Harbour, and O. Allen Noble, these three guys, I really look up to. I think they are amazing speakers, amazing communicators. AJ Swoboda is another one of those guys. On AJ Swoboda, he has a podcast with his friend Nijay Gupta, who's a Bible scholar. Swoboda is a theologian, and it's called Slow Faith. And they really dive into these aspects of faith that are not being talked about much elsewhere, where it's like, what do you do as like a Christian who's also an academic, who's really curious and who's very interested in deeper things about theology? And what if you're in a community that finds that those academic needs aren't really being met. And so they discuss how to kind of navigate those situations, which might sound kind of niche, but I mean, it's a very popular podcast. Lots of people can relate to it because, sometimes they might find themselves in a community where they can't really relate to a bunch of other people necessarily. And so I really, really enjoy those resources. In general, especially just for young men, I always recommend this guy named John Mark Comer, which if anyone's following me right now.
You wrote a whole thing about him, yeah.
Yeah. So people are probably gonna laugh at me because I mean, because
he's kind of a celebrity pastor, though.
He is kind of a celebrity pastor, but I would put him at like the absolute. He's the most famous celebrity pastor who's also very orthodox and very committed to the way of Jesus. That's how I would put it. But yeah, for a young man, he is an amazing person to look up to. John Tyson is another one of those guys. But all of those people that I just mentioned so far are amazing men. They inspire me in so many ways, and I really recommend them to everybody because I think that they would do the same for them.
Let's talk relationships. There is a great Substacker. His name is Ryan Burge, and he visualizes a lot of trends. And he highlighted that American men born after 1985 are more likely to attend church weekly than female counterparts. Do you have any conversations, any concerns about there being eventually a cultural, religious mismatch between men and women?
Oh, yeah. No, I can definitely see that. But it's funny because I would say like 10 years ago when I started attending Christian community, it was kind of the opposite direction where there were so many faithful, beautiful women who did not have any men to choose from whatsoever in their community. And now it's sort of gone in the other direction where it's like if there's so many men now in most communities that there's not enough women to compensate for them. Sorry, that sounded kind of like a crude way to put it, but essentially, yes, like there are many men who are very mature and there are less women who are as mature. And so there is definitely a mismatch right now. And I would say that seems to be
when you're talking about mature, you're talking about being equally yoked. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, equally yoked.
But can I say there is no bigger turnoff in the world as a person, and especially romantically, if somebody is high on their own, I'm very cerebral, I'm very advanced, and people are like, get over yourself, get over it.
Absolutely. Yeah, 100%.
So men should not be doing that.
Yes.
Yikes.
Absolutely.
Part of the issue seems to be young women, politically, but also religiously, are moving left. A lot of them do not like these concepts of men are supposed to be the ones in charge. In your church, women can be in charge. In my church, women cannot be in charge. And in their own homes, they are definitely not into submission. Growing up, my mom and my aunts, they ran the houses, but they would always say, but, of course, the spiritual head of the family is your dad. And I'm like, But a lot of women are not into submission.
Yes.
So that's going to be a permanent stumbling block, it seems, because a lot of men are going to say, hello, it's right here in the Bible. And a lot of women are going to be like, I'm not doing that.
Yeah. Well, I think part of the issue is like if a young man is dating a woman and slides out a Bible and says, here, look at this, you must submit to me. That's a horrible way to use that verse. And it's not accurate. That's not what it's getting at there.
Good.
So, yeah, I mean, the thing is, like, Christianity is the best philosophy that's ever been created. Like, if you follow it as it's supposed to be followed, it will lead you into the fullness of joy. You will experience life to the full in this present reality, not just as a metaphor, but as a lived reality. And so if we believe that to be true, then whatever is going on in that submission passage, whatever you want to call it, is actually for the best. It's not just a tool for coercion or a way to control others or for a man to get everything that they want in every situation. There is something behind that that's undergirding it and that's ultimately being pushed forward that is ultimately beautiful and like progressive, even if you want to put it like that. Like, I mean, everybody hates on that submission passage from Ephesians, but I mean, if you were in the first century context where Paul was writing that passage, it is so insanely progressive. It is so beyond anything that was going on in their entire echelon at that point. Because, at that time, men were not required to love their wives. Women were treated horribly. They were not respected. Men would often stop I mean, sorry for being crass, but men would often stop on the way home from work or trade for the day and stop at a brothel and sleep with a woman and then go back to their actual wife, because women were not valued and marriage was not respected in that way. So for Paul to come along and say, women, submit to your husbands, but then after that, husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church, that you may present her holy and radiant before him one day, that is insane. That is so far beyond anything that was going on in their culture. I think the only other person who recommended something like that even close was Plato, like 300 years ago. But people like laughed him off. They were like, why is this weird guy trying to respect women so much? And so then Paul comes along and says, this isn't just philosophy. This is reality. This is theology. You will respect your wife and honor her as Christ loved the church, sacrificing yourself for her. So if we take the full-on interpretation of what that submission passage actually is, it is so remarkably beautiful. And if it ever is abused, then that they're obviously using it wrong, because it's not supposed to be used in the sense that it's supposed to be domineering or coercive or anything like that. And so it is a big stumbling block, especially for young women right now. But if men and women collectively together, Western church culture, whatever you want to call it, if we all work together to try to iron it out in a more cohesive and level-headed and sorry, as I'm saying this, I'm realizing that's not going to happen. We're so divided. There's no way we're going to.
But let's try conversations. Yeah. Hey, you mentioned culture, and I wonder if culture is in some ways propelling this stuff with young men, because I've heard it talked about as a reaction to the Great Awakening, that as society moved so far left and tried to impose all these new rules or thoughts or orders or orthodoxy, that a lot of young men said, no, that doesn't work for me. I don't believe that. And I'm going to go over here, which is something everybody else spurned. How does the church make sure that seed doesn't sprout up and die out, that it actually takes root?
Oh my goodness. I mean, that is a great question. So, I mean, I'm sure most people listening to this have probably heard of him, but Jordan Peterson, who's this public intellectual, used to be a very
psychologist.
Yeah, psychologist. He still is and everything like that. But he's very interested in the Bible and Christianity, and he's on this journey, and he's been on this journey publicly, trying to reconcile like Christian faith with actual psychological principles and everything like that. And he's become this very big figurehead for young men specifically. And so we have these figures like Jordan Peterson, and even to like a greater extent, you have these people like Joe Rogan, who not Christian at all, like not even remotely close to that, but he's espousing these more traditional manly values that so many young men are latching onto and, like craving. And they're like, oh, this guy is actually giving me the kind of lessons or the confidence that I actually want. And so I want to like follow him and everything like that.
Cultural Christians, they call themselves sometimes, right?
Yeah,
I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And so we have so many of these interesting voices that are starting to bring in more young men to the church. But one of the issues is like and this actually has happened a lot in our young adults ministry, is like these guys will show up for the first time. They'll be like, I found this YouTuber who told me that Christianity was real and I want to give it a shot. And it's like, great, amazing, and everything like that. But then there comes the issue where it's like a lot of the stuff that YouTuber is talking about is not aligning with Christian orthodoxy. And so how do we basically deinstitutionalize these lessons that you've embedded in yourself from these YouTubers and actually get you more associated with the historic Christian orthodoxy? And that part is extremely difficult. But again, being a community with them, being a connection with them, actually living in relationship to them will make your influence on them stronger than any YouTuber or podcaster possibly could be. And
I was trying to think, Calvin, I can't remember Tulip because it's been a long time, but one of them is the irresistible draw, right? Yeah. So if you have to think of that kernel is in there, that irresistible draw, that, even if there are these moments of working out the kinks of theology, that they can hopefully stay,
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
I wanted to end on this, Griffin. Gen Z is half as likely to be atheist as Gen X and boomers, according to the Times. And we've gone through all the other numbers. There's this searching, there's this longing, and then there's this action behind it of people actually pursuing it and saying, I want to find out, I want a connection. As you look at ages in your theological instruction and vision. What do you think our age is going to be remembered as?
Do you mean like what are theological movements right now will be
Yeah,
remembered as?
of where are we? I think back to the 40s, the 50s, Pentecostalism, the
Yeah,
wind was blowing again, and, we were speaking in tongues and we were being slain in the spirit, and that was kind of sweeping the nation.
yeah, yeah,
A lot of these religions kind of died out, or at least died down, and now, where are we?
yeah. Well, I think it's interesting that you mentioned the Pentecostalism thing because it was super big, especially in like the 70s, the 80s, building off of the Jesus movement and everything like that. But then it sort of slid into like a neo-Pentecostalism, which is, if you're looking for a definition of what neo-Pentecostalism is, just look at like any live stream from like Hillsong or Bethel or any of those kind of churches. That'll give you a good idea. Like neo-Pentecostalism, very worship-oriented, very performance-oriented, things along those lines. So that's been a huge movement, and that's sort of, I mean, pretty much coincided with the whole megachurch phenomenon as well. But if we're, I mean, I am not great at prediction in general because most predictions don't end up to be true. But if we're looking at the trajectory of where things are at,
When is Jesus coming back? Exactly. Can you give me a date?
gosh, absolutely not. So if we're looking at just broad strokes movements, I mean, you have Gen Z very interested in traditional church. You have Asbury Revival, which happens at pretty close to what you would call a neo-Pentecostalist environment. I'm not sure if they would like that name, and so I won't put it on them, but pretty close, where it's like very emotional. It's driven by worship, it's driven by expression and things like that. But what was so interesting about Asbury Revival, and very similar like small revivals or whatever you want to call it that popped up over the past almost 2 years since that happened, is that they are not at all driven by performance at all. Like if you had tuned into Asbury Revival, it didn't sound good. It was people who didn't sing very well, playing guitars or out of tune, and just
You thought they didn't like neo-Pentecostalism. Now they really won't like it.
yeah, okay. Well, I mean, I say this out of respect. And then when they had, I remember hearing this interview with one of the kids who was involved and he said that while they were there, Fox News tried to interview them. They had famous worship leaders and famous pastors trying to come in and preach there, and they told them not to. They were like, we don't want that. And so these worship leaders who actually could show up and give an absolutely world-class performance were just being turned away because they were like, we're not interested in that aspect of this faith anymore. And I personally just feel like that's emblematic of where things are going to start heading. It's going to drift away from these performance-driven power displays or whatever you want to call them, and more towards a very hidden, a very authentic, and a very real expression of faith that kind of builds out of these hidden places that is the same whether you're online or whether you're offline. It's consistent in all programs and all settings of your life. Like you wake up the same person, you go to bed the same person, and you're always constantly praising God and thanking God and walking with God throughout the day as that person. You're not putting on a performance. You're not talking about Matthew 6 with where Jesus is giving this long diatribe against the hypocrites, which essentially just means actors. And he says, do not be like the hypocrites, the actors who try to show off their righteousness in front of other people, because they have already received their reward. And the reward is the fact that they will look good to other people. They will look like they're righteous. And so they get their reward. It's like Jesus is just saying, yes, like if you want to look righteous to other people will think that you're righteous, but you're not going to get a reward from God. You are not going to receive an actual reward that transcends those moments where you're on a stage. Like it'll just be there. And so I really do see a hunger for that genuineness. And so whatever expressions of church end up becoming the more dominant ones or the more expressive ones, I would assume that in general, it's going to trend in a direction that leads towards more hiddenness, more authenticity, not authenticity as like a Charles Taylor, make your own reality and be your own person and everything like that, but like an authenticity that, transcends all social environments. You are the same person here as you are there, that kind of idea. And so I would say churches that can embody that is probably the direction that it would end up in.
I kind of got chills when you said that, because revival growing up was a tent revival, and we'd be there till midnight and we'd have the prophets come in. But to say, no, this is actually happening in the secret place and the revival's inside, that's beautiful. Griffin, I have so enjoyed this. Where can people read you?
If you go on Substack, Reality Theology with Griffin Gooch, that's pretty much where I'm most active these days.
All right. I'll be reading. I'm subscribed. Thank you, Griffin.
All right. Thanks so much. This has been so fun.
God is clearly getting this second look by a generation most experts thought were long gone. They would never set foot in a church. So how should the church approach this moment? Have you noticed it in yours? How will a new crop of young, passionate believers impact our culture more broadly? I would love to hear your thoughts on that. Leave a comment below. Also, please like and subscribe to All Boy on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple. The website is allboyallgood.com. I'm Chance Seals. See you soon.